Good evening. To those of you here visiting us in person tonight and to those watching remotely, welcome to our agenda setting meeting for our April business meeting, our agenda setting meeting March 21st, 2017. There are agendas in the hall on the table just to the right of the doors if you'd like to follow along with us. And for those who are watching remotely, you can get an agenda from AthensClarkCounty.com. There'll be no final action taken tonight on agenda items. Items discussed will move to our business meeting on April 4th for consideration and vote. If you have a cell phone or other device, would you please turn them off or to silent? There will be two opportunities for citizen input tonight. Our consent agenda, which are items 1 and 2, and 3 through 13. Item number 4 has been withdrawn. The second will be for new business items 14, 15, 16, and 19. Citizen input is not accepted for staff reports on Planning Commission recommendations, which are items 17 and 18 tonight. There'll be a public hearing on these items at our April 4th meeting. Our rules of commission allow 3 minutes for citizens to comment. There's a light on Ms. Spratlin's desk that will be green when you start. It will turn yellow at 2.5 minutes. And ask that you please have your comments finished so that there'll be no need to interrupt you. If you brought handouts tonight, if you would give them to Mr. Berryman, he'll make sure that we get them. And before we start our business tonight, there are a couple of recognitions I'd like to do. Number one is Commissioner Harrod.
What'd I do?
You'll be surprised. And well, I'm surprised that you have stuck it out for 10 years. So I
got here too early.
I have a 10-year service pin for you, and I hope you'll wear it proudly. And the other shout out that I have is for our commission heroine, Allison Wright. And I hope everybody saw Sunday's paper because I think it's one of the cutest photos of an elected official I've ever seen. It's her almost in midair.
I was up there.
And she rappelled down from the Athens Orthopedic Clinic's building, and she was doing it to raise money for 3 really wonderful local nonprofits. And they're Children's First, the Nancy Travis House Child Care Project, and Interfaith Hospitality Network. And everybody and I don't know how much money you raise, but
enough to go over the edge.
And she had to raise a minimum of $1,000, so we know she raised at least $1,000 for these charities. Thank you, Allison. You represent us very well, and I saved this for you.
Thank you. Send it to my mom.
And so now we'll begin our March 21st agenda setting meeting with our consent agenda. These items have been reviewed by the agenda team, which consists of the mayor pro tem, the county attorney, and our senior management staff, and are recommended for approval on Tuesday, April 4th. The mayor or the commission may remove any item from the consent agenda. And at this time, we'll start our public comment on our consent agenda, which are items 1 through 3 and 5 through 13. If anyone would like to speak to those, please come to the podium and give us your name, address, and the item number you're speaking to. Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Is there any commissioner who would like to remove an item?
Just number 3 for a quick comment, please.
Okay. Give me a second because I didn't bring a pen up here with me. You got an extra pen, Jean? Thank you. And which number, Andy? 3.
Number 3.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, we'll discuss item 3 because that's the only one anyone wants to talk about.
I just wanted to mention for anybody that's watching out in TV land or internet land that this is a traffic calming plan for the Plantation Drive in southeast Clark County in Carrington Plantation neighborhood. And Steve Decker and I met with some of the residents out there a month or so ago. And for anybody that lives in that district or that neighborhood that's not aware, I just want to let them know that there will be some traffic calming coming to their neighborhood. And so if they're watching television,
that's great, and we'll just leave that on the consent.
Yes.
And I'll also point out that we're also doing a traffic management calming program similar to this one, which are the traffic tables on Brooklyn Road. And this is the area where we had a significant issue where a young lady lost her life may have been a year or so ago now. Time passes fast, but I'm very happy to see that one go on there. Okay, we will now go to our new business and citizen input on that, and those are items 14, 15, 16, and 19. So if you'd like to speak to those, this is time. Come see us.
Hi, I'm Clint McCrory. My address is 390 Franklin Street in Athens, and I want to speak about item 14, fiscal year 18 pavement management project. This provides an opportunity to comment that we have a rather weak complete streets policy. In particular, the only policy that we have that applies to resurfacing is conversion of 4 lanes to 3 lanes and adding bike lanes. About a year ago at the January 2016 work session, David Clark suggested some improvements to the complete streets policy, but his improvements have not yet been adopted as policy. I think we should go even farther than what he suggested. I won't review that now, but the 2 key points from my viewpoint are we need really systematic public input to make our streets safer, and we need routine inclusion of bike and pedestrian improvements in the annual budget, not just in T-SPLOST or SPLOST. It's interesting to look at the appendix to this agenda item, which includes an 8-page resurfacing deficit list of 407 street segments that need work, a total of 162 miles. I assume that this will be used to justify using all of the GDOT LMIG funds for resurfacing, and probably also to justify doing a large part of this using T-SPLOST if it passes. What I mean by routine inclusion of bike and ped improvements is that, for example, a similar deficit list should be included for sidewalks and bike lanes and should be presented to the Commission every year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Russell Edwards, 400 Duncan Springs Road. Glad to see the fireworks on the new business, and wanted to reiterate my support of holding this great event downtown. I have a very modest radio program every Thursday at 3 o'clock on WXAG, 92.7 FM. You may have heard it, and about 3 weeks ago, I spoke on the fireworks. Never received so many phone calls, 10 phone calls into our little 100-watt station. The lines were lit up, and every single person expressed support for this event and appreciated the event. And one person went so far as to say, what can I do? How can I get involved to help bring this event back to downtown? I said, well, call me during the commercial break and I'll get to know you and we'll figure something out. Got to know this individual, met her at the Carmike Cinema and gave her just a very simple petition that I took a few minutes to put together that reads as follows. The 2016 Downtown Athens Fireworks Spectacular was a phenomenal display of community. Thousands of attendees from diverse backgrounds celebrated our country's founding in the best attended family-friendly event that downtown has seen in years. It was an event of regional significance that was a boon to Athens business. Most importantly, it helped establish that downtown Athens welcomes families and children. We respectfully urge the Mayor and Commission to put the fireworks show back in the budget and keep it there, please. We're tired of debating fireworks every year. Robust property tax receipts from the abundance of luxury student apartments provides capacity in the budget to fund this request, not to mention the spike in local sales tax receipts that comes from such a popular event. I went around at the last regular meeting. I know I read off the names of the local businesses downtown who expressed support for this. And what struck me was it was retail businesses, restaurants, bars, all speaking with one voice, which seemed to me just to be a beautiful moment in the business community, all expressing support. You know, the retailers, they might have been closed, but they recognized that the restaurateurs were doing well, and their customers were, all customers benefited. Anyway, I gave this lady this petition, you know, expecting her to carry it around. In 2 weeks, she got 740 signatures, handwritten signatures from all over the community. Got a permit to set up a table at UGA campus, went to the World of Wonder Park 5 times and talked to families about this event, got their signatures. So it really was just a wonderful moment for me to witness her activism and her taking ownership of this issue and doing something about it. So just wanted to share that. Thank you for your consideration.
Hello, I'm Devin Clower. I live at 375 and a half Holman Avenue here in Athens. I've been in Athens maybe not as long as some other people, but I've been here since 2000, and to me it has such a sense of place and community, and there's so many things I love about this town. And with that being said, last year, speaking of the fireworks, it was just such a successful, diverse family event, more fun than I've ever had at any event in my little history here. I also am a business owner. I have a store on Clayton Street, Frontier. And last year, the energy from everybody participating in the events downtown, just spending time downtown, they'd eaten lunch, they were leisurely shopping. We stayed open until 9 o'clock and had an extra 3 hours of great economic impact for my business in the middle of the summer, more so than any other summer event that goes on in this town, as great as they are. So I just want to reiterate my support of this event and anything that we as businesses downtown can do. I know that we have drummed up a lot of support in this, and we're all fired up to back that up with action. And I just want to say thank you for taking this into consideration. I'm excited to see it on the agenda and look forward to hearing what y'all do about it. Thank you.
Tricia Rupersberg, 5798 Barnett Shoals Road. I also would like to speak in favor of having the fireworks be downtown and stay downtown. I do think it's great for business, and I do think it's great to show the community that downtown welcomes families and children. Our reputation tends to be that it's all bars, which it isn't. And we do have a vibrant retail community and a vibrant restaurant community. And I think anything that we can do to encourage more community involvement in downtown and to show them that we are there we are the downtown for Athens and Clark County. So we need to encourage events that are for everybody. So thank you.
We'll start. Sorry, did somebody ask me? I thought somebody was trying to get my attention. We'll go to item number 14, which is our next item, which is the pavement maintenance project. Anybody want to address that or have any questions? Ms. Link.
I'll just address it. I want to point out Mr. McCrory's comments about the complete streets policy that we have. And this being an opportunity to take a look at some of the streets that are getting repaved and maybe get some of those traffic calming or bike pedestrian changes to them. And I don't know that there are any of these streets that would actually be triggered by that complete streets policy where we allow for 3-laning when we have 4-lane roads. But there are other kinds of striping that could be done to help calm traffic. I know that on King Avenue, they put the stripes down the side of the road, and they're not bike lanes, they're not regulation bike lanes, but those stripes are enough to kind of, narrow the road and slow people down. I feel like, the speeds on King have dropped. And also when we did Doherty Street, we, just by putting those lines for parking, even when there aren't cars parked there, it seems to really slow traffic down. So I just want to advocate for some assessment of some of these streets where we have had complaints about speeding, or, I know Peter Street, I know folks who live there who have talked about it. Places like some of our more rural streets like Nowhere Road in Winterville, maybe we can look at some other measures of striping changes that could help bring down the speeds, because we certainly have cyclists on those roads, and there may not be room for bike lanes, but hopefully there are some things we can do to calm that traffic a little bit.
Thank you. Ms. Wright?
Yeah, I wanted to also encourage us when we get to where it's resurfaced, if we could just add a little paint to the budget. So when there's on-street parking, if we can put just even a little T that marks where they would park. So like on Newton, which is part of my district, on the one side's yellow and one side's parking, but it's limited. But if it was marked to where, let's say if 12 can fit there, if it's marked, sometimes only 8 people park there because they are not snug in there. And it could give us an efficient, accurate count of on-street parking as opposed to there being leftover spaces in between cars that people can't. So not necessarily marking it incomplete like they are for the meters, but just a small T when it's appropriate can help the parking and keep people aware that cars can be there and to practice staying in their lane.
Could you look into that for us and maybe give us an answer before our voting meeting? Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment on this? Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I know another improvement that I'd like to see on some of our arteries around town is just beautification and removal of asphalt in those occasions when really it's unnecessary. I look at one of the projects in this list, Cedar Shoals Drive, and there are long stretches of Cedar Shoals where there are no left turn movements at all, yet there's a center turn lane. And I think it would be a great beautification and environmental asset of a street like that when it comes up for full resurfacing, which it isn't in this list. It's just for minor repair to lift up that asphalt altogether. So I'd like us to have that be another screen that we look at as we filter through this list of street repaving, if we can simply replace asphalt with soil and planted matter. And I'll mention a couple other specific streets when we get to the next street item in a few minutes.
Sounds like a great idea. Let me see if anybody else hadn't spoken. Anybody else? Okay, Ms. Link.
I also want to point out that when you do that, when you have those medians or whatever, there's the opportunity for some stormwater abatement. The whole Green Streets initiative where you can allow the stormwater to infiltrate into a median rather than washing off to the side of the road. So that's something that we should start considering when it comes time to resurface these streets and possibly add planted medians.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I think I speak for my colleague, Commissioner Hamby, when I look at this street list and say, wow, we've got some streets on the west side that are going to be repaved. A whole bunch of them, in fact.
Well, I don't know that they're going to be repaved. You might want to look.
No, these are repaved.
Oh, these are repaving?
Yeah,
Okay.
This is structural asphalt overlay, resurfacing.
Yeah.
So, so I'm really pleased to see this because some of these streets, one of which I live on, have been over-graveled and tarred a couple of times in the last 15 years, and it's time. So I appreciate this very much.
More than paving, we have a lot of new black squiggly lines. Mm-hmm. But that's extending the life of our roads. So
I understand
it's very important.
I understand.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll go on to item number 15, which, excuse me.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I forget we have to make those decisions. We got so many on discussion. Item number 15, which is our annual action plan for housing and community development. And I will let the public know that we are tentatively scheduled to have a public hearing on this on April 4th, if someone wants to speak to us on it. Anybody else, any more of our commissioners want to address this? Ms. Link.
I just want to point out that the current federal budget proposes for these funds to go away. And pretty much all of our housing and community development funding depends on these federal funds. So I hope that we can have some kind of discussion of a contingency plan, because if that budget passes, it could really devastate this community. There are a whole lot of folks living in poverty who are directly impacted by programs that we fund through these CBDG federal funds. So I think it's a discussion, unfortunately, we need to have soon.
Well, I think this is one of the better federal programs around, and hopefully better heads will prevail. Mr. Sims.
Just to say, one of the things that over the years we've been trying to get all of these agencies to understand that this money at some point is going to go away. So, it shouldn't come as a surprise to them that this is going to happen. But, and this is why we've been trying to encourage them to build capacity so that if these programs did go away, they could stand on their own and not be dependent on these kind of programs. That's why we basically started the Challenge Grant, where people were only staying for 3 years. So after 3 years, if they weren't standing on their own, they were losing funds. So this isn't something that should come as a shock to any of us. So we should really be, these agencies should be preparing to deal with that kind of situation.
And if they prepare and we still get the money, they're even better off.
If the money comes, then we'll deal with it. But
Right.
if it doesn't, they need to be prepared for that.
Anybody else want to comment on this one? Okay, and this one I don't even think can go on consent, can it, Jane? No.
It's got to have a public hearing.
Yeah. And so now we get to probably the most popular one of the night, July 4th fireworks. And I know there's folks want to talk about that. Who wants to be first?
I'll go first. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. You've
Well-
earned your right after the wall climbing.
Oh,
I didn't go first on Saturday, that's for
You
sure.
better be careful. She'll be milking that for the next couple of years.
I also am supportive of the fireworks and us making a way for it to be back downtown. I've gone for years when it was at Bishop Park, and it was a great turnout, but it was a park format versus a shopping and economic development format. And people were spread out to where you didn't necessarily mingle as much as I saw last summer when we did it. So, and I also am for it not being on July 4th. I think it's good to pick a good day that's close to it.
That's good because we probably don't have a choice.
Well, I saw that, but I'm also good with that. It's kind of an Athens thing.
I agree with you. I think that's great. Ms. Bell would be next. And did you want to speak? Okay. Ms. Bell.
I think I've probably spoken on this many times, and y'all know I've said when I walked up and turned that corner on Washington Street, there were tears in my eyes when I saw the all-inclusive look that we had with all the families. It was so wonderful. And I think this is the one time that we can have ownership of downtown for our community and the outside communities and all the families. And it was a wonderful experience. So, yes, I hope we'll bring it back downtown. Thank you.
Ms. Link.
I'm in support of our downtown fireworks. For a lot of folks, these special events that we have downtown are the only time they really feel welcome and comfortable downtown. And, there's really not much to do with your children downtown. So an event like this is definitely family friendly and definitely invites folks who have kids to come downtown and enjoy the fireworks. So I look forward to this discussion.
Mr. Herod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm supportive of a July the 4th celebration, even though it does celebrate the recent unpleasantness against my people.
It's a matter of opinion.
But nevertheless, and I certainly can see some advantages to it being downtown, and I certainly understand why the businesses downtown would like for it to be downtown. But without pushing the metaphor of raining on a parade too far, I do think it's important, if we're going to spend public money on this, that there are plenty of other businesses in other parts of the community that contribute tax dollars who would be funding this. And I think I would like to think that we can somehow think of some events, maybe it's not the July the 4th event, but some other events that could be held on the east side or on the west side that those businesses could also benefit from, because I think it's an issue of equity across the county. So, thank you.
Totally understand. Anybody else?
Yeah,
Dickerson?
since there was a budget submitted, I actually had a couple of thoughts. I really, and this is getting nitpicky, but I don't see how much how much advertising we would really need to do. It sounds like to me we've already advertised this thing to death. So I guess I would ask management to look at ways to thin this out a little bit, to streamline it a little bit. I'm also, because obviously with Facebook and NNI and websites and press releases and all that kind of stuff, I don't see where we need to necessarily do that. It could be businesses downtown could simply put a flyer in their window so that people would see that kind of stuff. So I do want to encourage, if we have a VIP event, that I assume that there would be tickets sold to that would not be part of this funding, that would be something people would add, be extra. I had a question about what exactly is event staffing, because it's only on the one downtown, but not on the one, and it doesn't include, it's not talking about police. We've got overtime staffing costs on the one that would be held at Bishop at $500, but we've got $3,000 for event staffing downtown, and that's separate from police or sheriff. So I'm kind of curious what that is.
Sure.
And then I guess I would like to encourage us as a government to look to the Downtown Development Authority to co-sponsor or partially sponsor this, as well as the Classic Center. Perhaps their portion could be sponsored, and maybe even the Emergency Management Service to do something. I mean, I think all these people, it's a community effort. We're going to give probably 2/3 of the budget, but it'd be nice, I think, for us to look at, collaborative effort, and perhaps even the university. Who knows? I mean, I know it's a summer thing, but, they are part of the community, and we've talked about this in Envision Athens, is that there needs to be more community events, activities, and even though some of the students may not be here, it's still part, some of the students are here, and some of the staff and faculty are here. So I would just encourage looking at ways to pare down the budget a little bit, and also try to look for ways to get some sponsorship on this.
Well, I'll take some responsibility for this, because part of this is we, again, are sort of crunch time to get it done. And basically, our staff used the budget from the ADDA last year for a basis for it. And I don't think any of this is set in stone. Also, I expect that we're probably going to get some sponsorships, because we've already had some spoken commitments that people would be happy to sponsor. So, Mr. Gertz.
I do like Sharon's idea about having some defined roles for some of the community organizations. Maybe ADDA takes on the marketing component. Maybe if there's going to be some kind of, VIP event, DABA takes that on. I think in future years, we just need to have a template and stick with it, so we don't get to a late hour and have questions about what the nature of the event is going to be, what roles are going to be pursued by which organizations. And so I think, I like to think this is our sort of cornerstone year, and we're just going to kind of follow in the format as we move forward. And I appreciate you kind of having spoken publicly about having a defined budget for this in our budget, which we're working on right now.
Well, I think the third year will probably be the charm. We were flying blind last year. We're learning a little bit this year from last year. I think we'll have it down pat by another year. Mr. Hamby.
Sure, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I will say, that was the intent of ADDA last year. There was another location that wasn't able to do it at the last minute last year, and the ADDA thought it would be a good idea to have the fireworks downtown, and we stepped forward and tried to do the best we could with it. Certainly, some of the expenses that Commissioner Dickerson outlined probably don't need to happen again this year. I would argue that as well. I would also argue that ADDA did a good job of reaching out to potential business partners to help with that. Blasingame Purge comes to mind as somebody. Landmark also gave a hefty $10,000 to the effort, as did. I'm drawing a blank, so I'm not going to.
Yeah, I wish we had the list, because we did have a significant number of community partners that stepped forward and helped last year.
And the government did too last year. So there was a lot of effort, and I would expect that we would see the same sort of effort at this time this year, because it was a community event, and a lot of people appreciated it. So.
And it was much more than just fireworks. It was a community event, and I hope that's what we'll do again this year. That we'll have more than just fireworks. Anybody else? Mr. Williams, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
No, other than just that we do intend to fundraise, but we just need to know we have a fully funded event so we can go forward with planning. But we intend to and we have talked to the new Downtown Development Authority directors who are working with DABA. We've sort of challenged them, this differential between Bishop and downtown, to try to at least get that much, if not more. The difference in 500 and 3,000 is they're two different environments, and as you pointed out, the park environment is a little less involved in the downtown environment with barricade setting and, those types of things. So that's the difference in the staff cost.
That's right.
I just had an idea, and I wanted to share it before I lost it, sort of thing. I have a great park and ride in my district, and maybe we could have bus shuttling so that people who are coming into town from that direction have a lovely place to park, and that we can maybe have some bus service bringing people into town and alleviate some of the parking congestion. It's a great park and ride. Come visit.
And hopefully we'll have such big crowds that there won't be enough parking. We'll have to use that.
And that as well.
That's great. Anybody else?
Just a quick question about.
Yes, Mr. Sims.
I see here it says only 3 companies were available for Saturday the 1st, and only 1 was still available for the 4th of July. Are we talking about the 1st or the 4th of July?
If it's downtown, we suggest Saturday the 1st.
And that'll save us a little money as well. So, yeah. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, then the last thing that we've got before we get to our planning items is the GDOT Local Maintenance Improvement Grant that came to us sort of at the last minute. That's why it's added out of order with the item numbers. Mr. Williams, would you just give us a brief update on that?
Sure. This is some additional funding from GDOT for their off-system safety program project list. I know y'all just got this, but basically it can fund safety improvements such as raised pavement markers, rumble strips, pavement marking signs, and so on and so forth. So our staff is acutely aware of those safety improvements that GDOT finds favor with, and that would be raised pavement markers and some remarking the roads where the pavement markings are starting to fade. There's also a special project that's an overheight vehicle detection system at the College Avenue Railroad Bridge, which will apparently, truck's coming, it's too big, it's going to warn it to stop. I haven't seen this in operation, but this is what I'm told. We're asking for $600,000. Only $1.5 million is available for all of Northeast Georgia, so we may not get all that, but we wanted to ask for what we thought was competitive. And we will match that if we're awarded with about $260,000.
Smiling about that overhead light that warns people. When my son was in high school, he worked part-time for a moving company, and he wiped out a truck and actually shifted one of the bridges a little bit because of his inexperience, and his boss told him to go a certain place. He just thought the shortest route to get there was that, and had no thought about the height of the bridge. So I tease him about that every time something comes up. He was working for Phil. Trying to remember the name of the company. It was a moving company that moves long range, and he was promoted to a supervisor very suddenly. And I think he got demoted very suddenly too.
I'll tell you a story. I had a guy like that who was working for me, and he went under there was 2 bridges at the time. There's only one now.
Yeah.
And they said, so why did you keep going? He says, well, I made it under the first one, didn't I?
Yeah. But he'll never live that down. He graduated from high school and got his Eagle Scout with a black eye from the accident. So would you come forward and help us, Mr.
I've got some questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You go first, Kelly.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought this was a no-brainer. We want the money. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I think we definitely want the money. But following up on my kind of earlier preference for some ways to both create some safety improvements as well as some aesthetic improvements, there's some demonstrated literature that shows that having more narrow lanes slows traffic, and of course slower traffic is safer traffic. And there are a couple of places, one kind of separates my district and Commissioner Sims, and one just into Commissioner Sims, where there's much excess asphalt, and I'd like to see if this could fund some planted medians. North Avenue is one area that I have some interest in, really between Bray Street and Strickland Avenue. There are several areas there with very few left turn movements. And similarly, along Old Hall Road, really between the Dogwood Apartments and 4th Street, there are also several areas there where there's just lots of asphalt. And if we could more narrowly tailor those lanes with some planted medians, I think we'd also see safety improvements. So I just wanted to throw out those two prospects, and I know staff may have to do a little research into that, but I wanted to put those on the table.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so, and this may be a question for the manager. We have, so first of all, this is in priority order, and one of the roads in my district where we had a death is 39. So I guess I'm kind of wondering how deaths are figured into this, not just crashes, but we had a death at the intersection of Morton Road, Robert Hardeman, Lexington several years back. And I know it looks like on this, all that's being recommended is $600 for reflective pavement markers, but I had put in a request for 2 roads, one of which actually I guess intersects with Andy's district at Cooper Road and Lexington Road, which just about every week there's a wreck there. And then also one at Morton and Robert Hardeman and Lexington Road, where I just mentioned there was a death several years back. And I'm just wondering how that works into this, because I know staff was supposed to do an evaluation of that area, and I know DOT has safety money because that's what this is. So my question is, where is that going to fit into this process?
I'm not sure anybody can answer tonight.
Okay.
Can you, Blaine or Robert? Or you'll have to get back.
We can talk more, Commissioner, about what you were anticipating. I will say that, this grant is focused on easily constructed items, and some of the commissioners have mentioned medians that would have to be designed, and if you get into stormwater, then it's a lot more complicated. So it's just and it's also very costly.
Well, and to be specific, just so everybody else knows, what had been requested at the Morton Road and Robert Hardeman and Lexington intersection was a decel lane, because you pretty much have to take it on 2 wheels if you don't want to get nailed. Yeah. And the accident that occurred actually didn't have anything to do with signalization or anything. It had to do with somebody that was drunk that that passed through. And that happened a couple of days ago. A log truck ran through a red light on that road. So I mean, it's just a bad intersection. We just need some. I don't think any major improvements, because we already have it signalized. It's just adding a turn lane or a decel lane so people don't get run over at that light and stuff. So.
Blaine, if y'all could let us know that would be great to get that. And before I give the podium to Mr. Griffith, I was going to ask Robert or Blaine if y'all could get me the recommendations that Mr. McCrory mentioned from David Clark, just for memory refresher, because I'm drawing a blank on that and I'd like to see it again. So, anybody else before David comes up? Brad.
Mayor's gonna sit there. Always get to.
Ready whenever you are, Brad.
I'll sleep here.
That agenda item better be really well done. Fireworks. I think everybody's going to be happy.
Well, can't get it to wake up.
This is shutting down.
Uh-oh. May have just killed it, guys. I'm sorry.
Be patient.
Yep. I had a screen on here before.
Yeah, you did. You have it plugged in?
I think Kelly's idea of different groups taking different responsibilities is great.
My apologies.
Would you like to do this one without the overhead?
I'd be happy to. I don't think you're going to let me, though.
Little scout.
Yes.
Is that for you or just because you're involved?
I'm on the executive board.
Someplace I've got a tiny little silver about that big that they used to give to the mothers.
Okay.
When you have an eagle. I'm now pretending to brother.
Here you go.
I had a just think little boy James is one of the cutest kids around.
We are now ready. We have one rezone request tonight and then one text amendment. The first item is a request to rezone property at 825 Epps Parkway from RS25 Single Family to RS8 Planned Development. It's one parcel affecting 32.8 acres. The proposal is for 86 single-family attached dwellings in 43 two-unit structures. This is a development proposed with private streets. The one street would serve all the lots. It is a age-restricted 55 and over community with amenities provided that are in relation to that age group. And then you see some of the other landscape front yards. We'll go through some of the details on the plan. There are several waivers requested as part of this. A lot of those waivers are directly associated with the private street proposal versus public streets. And you see some of those listed here, and those are outlined in detail in your report as well. Here you see the subject property. It's about 33 acres. It's interesting. This property it's bigger than you think it is when you look at it in relation to Iris Place, adjacent to the north here. Iris Place was really phase one of what was to be a larger development about 20 years ago. This property was the original old phase two that was never designed or developed. But it does share frontage on a public street that you see separating the two of them. There we go. This street is public to this point where it makes the immediate hard left, and that would provide the frontage for the subject property. Currently undeveloped and wooded, the St. Ives subdivision adjacent to the upper right that comes in off of Epps Bridge and winds down along that, and Iris Place to the north. As I mentioned, Iris Place was rezoned in the late 90s. It was property zoned RS20 in 1997-98 when the PD was proposed. It was rezoned to an RS20 planned development, which then flipped to a 25 PD with the new zoning ordinance in 2000. I don't know that we would do it like this anymore today, in that it really is largely from a use standpoint. Iris Place is much more conducive to an RM zoning classification. There's really nothing single family about Iris Place, but it carried that designation with the PD attached to it. St. Ives, which you see just you see it adjacent coming in here. This property was zoned RS20 also in the mid-90s. About 25 years ago, a developer bought it and requested a rezone then to go from an RS20 to an RS10 zoning on the property. That was ultimately approved, and the subdivision was built at a density of about 2 units per acre. So it's a little less dense than this proposal, by about a half a unit an acre, but it is the same underlying zoning classification as is being asked for with this PD. So there you see the existing zoning and the proposed. You see Irish Place there in the darker orange. This is the site plan for the proposed development. As I mentioned, it's 43 single-family attached units on a private street in this configuration. This is a fairly challenging property from a topographical standpoint. I think there's about 150 feet of fall from the top down to the creek on the bottom. And what you see in terms of the color delineation there, the darker shaded areas that are along the western side and the southern side are listed as undisturbed. Those are the areas on the site that would remain vegetated and ungraded, and all of the grading would occur in one phase in the area that you see proposed there for the overall 43 building 86 unit development. As I mentioned, it is age restricted. There are details in the report that you have in front of you from the applicant and a little bit from us too with regard to what that age restriction means and what it does, and that can be made a condition of a zoning action that would then become binding upon approval if it were to be approved. We don't see those a lot, but this is something they're offering. Schematic of the clubhouse is proposed. That's a typical unit. There are 3 styles of these units, all very similar with some architectural detailing that is changed up, but largely 1 and 2 bedroom units with garages. And with a single family attached product like this, you would have a property line splitting that garage right down the middle, and each side would be individually owned as a separate parcel of land.
So David, before you go on, so those are, Brad, those are front entry garages?
Front entry garages, yes, ma'am. Okay. Planning Commission recommendation was for denial. We've given you a fairly lengthy pink sheet with this one because there was a lot of discussion at the Planning Commission meeting, and rather than try to morph all that into the report that you have, and this doesn't happen a lot, but the way this works, we write a report and we make a recommendation to the Planning Commission. The body of that report remains the same. Upon action from the Planning Commission, which is your recommending body, we basically just add one additional section at the end of that report with their recommendation, and that's what comes forward to you. Instead of putting all of that language that we noted in the pink sheet, we felt it was easier just to refer you to that by reference in the report. I think based on the nature of the discussion that the Planning Commission had with the applicant, I think, a couple of the real significant concerns were the issue of the private street versus public street and some of those waivers associated with it with regard to design speeds at 15 miles an hour instead of 25. And then concern also about the proposal to do basically a one-push grading proposal on this, where it would all be graded and cleared at once for an ultimate development time of about 24 months from start to finish if we're approved in this fashion. And I think those were probably the 2 biggest issues that the Planning Commission had with regard to this. A lot of concern about the nature of private streets and what happens with them 20 years out, ultimately leading to a recommendation to deny this. It was not a unanimous vote. I think it was 5-2, but that is the recommendation that is sent to you from the Planning Commission, and this is the plan that is associated with the request.
Mr. Hamby, this is yours. You want to
Sure,
talk to us about it?
I don't have anything to say. No, I'm just I probably shouldn't be joking so much. My mom said she was going to watch it on the computer tonight. I don't know why she picked tonight to watch it, and she's never watched it before. And the first thing she said to me was, "Well, make sure you're not late for the meeting." And look what happened. Do what?
You're doing real well.
Yeah, exactly. Certainly there are a lot of concerns about this project. There's concerns from the neighborhoods, from myself, and I hope from you as well. The petitioner and John Williams do good work. They've done good work all over town. This is a good work, but the property and the topography of this just do not lend it to this sort of project. If you look at the Planning Commission denial, it says, as the pink sheets that Brad pointed out, the Planning Commission expressed concerns with the proposed long cul-de-sac, private street maintenance, mass grading, the needs for zoning change, and the number of required waivers. And I would like to point out that the topography and the density are requiring all these waivers, especially when regarding the private streets, especially regarding the mass grading and whatnot. And Brad made a comment in regards to Iris Place. We wouldn't do this today. There's nothing single family about Iris Place. But I would argue we are doing this today by giving and looking at all these waivers. These waivers hit at environmental, safety, and transportation issues that we all ought to be concerned with. That's the rain. Oh. So there are those concerns. And a comparison was made to St. Ives. St. Ives is an RS8. But St. Ives does not have the attached housing component to it. If St. Ives had had asked for the waiver, the attached housing component, the density there would have been much larger. St. Ives complies with the residential density. So, I think you can make an argument that this really isn't a single-family request. It's more of a multifamily request, and such as that. But I would like to hear y'all's concerns, and I'll probably come back to some of these once I hear what y'all have to say.
Before we move on, though, Mike, you and I had talked about this, and you told me something about age restrictions I was not aware of. Would you repeat that for the rest
Sure,
of
and
us?
that's another question I had for y'all. Who would monitor the age restriction component of this request and that's within this PD?
I mean, I can answer that. If it were approved with that age restriction, it becomes a condition of the approval. So if there were, we would not do regular maintenance monitoring, but under the HUD program that gives them the ability to do this, there's a list of things that they're required to provide in order to maintain this status. One of which is a registration of all property owners. It has to be updated at least once every 2 years. And so that's a fairly easy request for us to make if we did have a neighbor indicate a concern that they think that this may have flipped in terms of the occupancy within that. That's certainly something that we could ask for to determine whether or not they remain in compliance with the PD based on, if they don't have that any longer, they're not in compliance with the PD at that point. If they do, they can provide that information to us.
The way the PD reads, and so what I'm hearing you is that HUD would actually be the sort of lead monitoring agent of all of this. Am I right in saying that?
I mean, yes. And really, the way this program works,
yeah, assuming HUD still exists.
Well, by maintaining, that status, it enables them an exemption under the Fair Housing Ordinance to restrict based on family status.
And Brad, the way I'm reading that HOPA, the Housing Against Older People, is that all you have to really do is show an intent to market to people 55 or older. And that's the way the PD is reading. You have to show the intent. And if they show the intent and aren't able, then you can intent to market to whoever you want to. And they're marketing to 55 or older. And if they don't meet that intent, then it looks like they've satisfied the conditions of the PD, and then they can rent to whoever they want to.
I think the way it is worded in there, and I'll certainly go back and look at it, was that they would maintain that status of required under HOPA.
I'd like to find it now if we could, because I was reading through here, and that's something that struck my mind about that, because there's nothing within the PD that ties them. And even if there is, let's just say there is, that's correct. They could always come back to this mayor and commission and get that changed. If they can't rent to, if they are unable to rent to somebody 55 or older, they can come back to get a change. And that's happened before, especially Williams and Associates. I know has done it once, maybe twice, to come back and get a PD change to allow for some ground floor living over on College Avenue, if y'all remember that building over there.
I mean, in the staff report,
what's the page of the?
And my pages are different than y'all's, but the way that we presented this in the staff report would have been, if it were to be approved, it would be approved with a condition that said that they shall comply with the senior housing restriction in accordance with the Housing for Older Persons Act of 95 as interpreted by HUD in 99.
Right, and all the requirements of the Fair Housing Act of the Housing for Older People, from the way I read it, is that all you have to do is to show the intent to market to the people of 55. And if you do that and show that intent to market to people of 55, then you've met the requirement. And you still have to, I mean, you're hoping to rent to everybody at 55, but if you follow the procedures with intent to market and you do the marketing and you still don't rent to 55, then you're out of luck. You're not out of luck. You can start renting to whomever. But also within that Housing for Older Persons Act, in this PD, they're suggesting that does follow the HOPA. 80% would be geared toward 55 or older. 20% would be towards less. So HOPA also requires, from the way I read it, and Attorney Behrman might read it differently, that the 20% has to be separated somehow from the other 80%, so that you have all of the 80% within the same sort of confines. So which of these houses or units or multifamily duplexes are going to be the 20%? Has he identified that in the PD?
I'll go back and look at it. I don't know that that's the way I've understood it in reading it, that it's, they are required to provide a registry every 2 years to demonstrate that they are under the 20% threshold, but it was not my understanding that they had to identify in advance. A lot of that early HOPA language was also.
Well, they may not have to identify it early in advance, but certainly if they're asking.
They've got to be able to identify they're under the 20%.
Well, and if they're asking us for a PD, I think, certainly the neighbors who have a lot of angst about this, I imagine they would like to know who's living behind them, so close behind them. The thing that, also concerns me, y'all, is Brad did mention that, we wouldn't do this today. About the way we zone Iris Place and whatnot. But with the 10 waivers, we are doing it today. And, I'm trying to think, I'm hard-pressed to think, and I don't disagree with you. I'm just hard-pressed to think of when we would do those, when we've ever done 10 waivers and the impact on it. And if somebody comes to us saying they're going to do senior housing, are we all of a sudden going to start issuing a whole bunch of waivers that throw out our design standards from here on out just because they know we need something, and we do. But I just would suggest that we be careful about that process, so that 20 years from now, the planning director won't be able to say, we wouldn't have done it that way, and go from there.
Well, Ms. Terry and then Mr. Neesmith. Does anybody else? Ms. Gertz, okay.
Well, just to follow up on what Commissioner Hamby was saying, reading the report here, what it actually says is that at least 80% of the occupied units are to be occupied by at least one person who is 55 years of age or older. It doesn't say that 80% of the residents have to be 55 or older. Correct. So it's quite possible that you could actually have a relatively small number of people who are 55 and over, and a relatively large number, even if 80% of the properties have one individual who is 55. If there are 3 other people or 2 other people living there who are 18, 19, or 20, that doesn't mean that 80% of the people there who are living there are over the age of 55. But I had another question and then a comment, or maybe it's 2 questions. So why do they want private streets?
It's basically because of design.
So are these narrower than our required streets?
It's not so much the width of the pavement as it is the horizontal and vertical curve allowances that they're not meeting under a 25-mile-an-hour design speed. Some of these,
So does this allow them to put more units on that piece of property?
No, I would probably argue that the private streets with these tighter curves allows them to put the same number of structures on the property with less disturbance overall. This curve would not meet a 25-mile-an-hour design speed. This one doesn't. There are also some vertical curve requirements that under 25, there's transitioning between a hill and a flat area or longer transitions than what they're showing in here in terms of, the grade is still 150 feet from top to bottom. They've designed it within the area of disturbance that you see, the grading area, where the walkways and sidewalks for pedestrian outdoor activities are. Those all meet ADA. So they've got to make transitions in other places, and some of those, and I have not evaluated the full, but you've probably got some transitions like here and maybe in some other places where it's a little steeper than a 25-mile-an-hour and then flattening back out.
Well, one of the things that concerns me, not simply the design of the project itself, but the impact that it's also going to have on Epsbridge Parkway, because that is a mess out there with all of the traffic. And, this project is almost across the street from the new St. Joe's property. It's about 300 to 400 feet down the street, and it's about 1,000 feet or so from Tanglebrook Drive and Parkway Boulevard, which is kind of the end of all of that commercial development down at that other end of Epsbridge Parkway. And I'm just thinking, adding all of this additional traffic onto that parkway is going to make that even worse than it already is. So that's a concern that I would have. But anyway, those are my comments.
Mr. Neesmith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The idea of having private streets, let me tell you the situation I have in my district. A neighborhood was built in the early 80s. A nice single home single-family neighborhood. Looks like the rest of the neighborhoods around it, except that developer wanted to have a cul-de-sac that didn't meet our street requirements so that he could build some office buildings behind the houses. And he didn't want that cul-de-sac to take up the room that he could build that office building. So he kept the streets private. That was in the early 80s. They established a homeowners association, which was owned by him. He died. There's still a homeowners association that's in the name of his widow. They've never spent a dime on the streets. They've never spent a dime on stormwater repair. Those folks now can't sell their houses because the banks won't give them mortgages because they're on private streets that are not being taken care of. So that was, 20, 30 years ago? And it happened, and this has all come to fruition. What's happening is that neighborhood, they're having to sell their houses for cash. So they're selling them for less than they would. They're having an impact on the property values around them because they're comparables. They're becoming rental properties. It's not a good thing. And it takes a long time for these things to develop. All the intentions were good, I'm sure, when this developer made this decision. As it turned out, things happen, they're gone. In order for them to repair those streets, it's going to cost $100,000 in materials alone. I won't go further into this, but that's the situation. There are a lot of things I don't like about this development, but that one thing alone, regardless of what they promise, regardless of how much incredible mortgage payments or rent these people are going to have to pay in order to put street repair into a sinking fund, which is another problem, I don't think it's worth the trouble. Yes, we need older folks housing. We need retiree housing here. This is not the design, certainly, for what we need. Thank you.
Mr. Gertz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's always the case when we have a parcel that hasn't been developed and you've got a couple of adjacent neighbors that have been developed for decades, as you have here, because those folks have gotten accustomed to a circumstance as they look out their kitchen windows and as they play with their children and as they raise their kids. And then they have to, contemplate, what it could be like with a completely new, different development in their backyard. So anytime we're in an environment where, we're going to see a large parcel like this prospectively developed, it's difficult territory to enter, and understandably so. So at least part of, I know what staff tries to do is sort of use the code language to compare what a prospective development would be like under a PD environment like this with what a development would be like if developed by right. And so, as I understand it, Brad, there would be about 45 homes here if this was developed as RS-25. And so we can look at tree canopy, and they come up fairly favorably. When it comes to tree canopy, they're obviously respecting the stream buffer, which is important to us because we've been concerned. And I know I've got several colleagues who live along McNutt's Creek that have had some negative experiences because of upstream neighbors sending debris into their backyard. So, it seems like in terms of tree canopy and buffer, things are solid here. In terms of overall population, obviously the population increase here would be relatively minor since these are 1 or 2 bedroom places rather than 4-bedroom homes. So you wouldn't really see any population increase. And there's some traffic study commentary regarding the overall number of vehicle trips that you would see in this environment versus an RS-25 build out. And this compares favorably there. Obviously, if you're looking at that kind of over 55 environment, you're seeing fewer trips on a daily basis. But aside from that sort of objective component, there are these elements that are somewhat either more subjective, where you ask, well, is there value added in the project overall, or is there sort of value lost in the project overall? And it seems like, from having spoken with a couple commissioners and a couple of residents of the adjacent neighborhood, it's that sort of value added or value lost, the kind of more subjective elements that they're really questioning. And part of it is the streets question that, as Jerry mentioned, we've run into a couple of times, not just here, but on the east side with Milford Hills a few years ago as well. I know the developer has tried to mitigate that by having a fund dedicated to future street repair, but I'd be interested in knowing just what our experience on the staff level has been, with with developers who've used that approach. I mean, the slower component doesn't necessarily strike me as problematic, given that, of course, we hear oftentimes from neighborhood residents who talk about wanting slower streets and wanting folks not moving through the neighborhood quickly. So that piece makes some sense, but I do have some questions about the private nature of this. And then the other piece that I know has come up is the question about the intent and then the permanence of the senior component. And so I tried to do a little bit of research. I looked at the 1999 HUD regulations. I mean, it does seem like there is quite a bit of teeth in there just in terms of maintaining not just the intent, but the residents. And there's an American Bar Association piece I can share with folks as well. And they caution developers to kind of be very clear about how you're going to manage that at least 80% threshold of primary residents, of primary tenants. One of the things that's mentioned in that piece is that one of the things that a development like this always has to account for is that notion that at some point somebody may pass away and leave the property to an heir. And so the American Bar Association piece recommends that a developer keep a much higher than 80% normative population of 55 pluses in the event that you might have a couple of those heir properties just moving through time. So, the other piece about this that I know is particularly for St. Ives folks concerning is just that backyard view that I alluded to kind of at the beginning of the comments. And Brad, I know one of the staff recommendations, should the Planning Commission have recommended this, was to remove some of these buildings, I guess 3 of the buildings that comprise 6 of the properties. Can you point out which ones those are?
Yep.
13 through 18.
Okay.
This one, and that one. So you would end up with a group of 3 and then a gap of 3 before you entered into the cul-de-sac. And the reason these were the 3 pointed out, these were really the 3 that were in the closest proximity to St. Ives and that rear property line, and it also served to really kind of break up the long repeating line of houses going down that side of the road. It'd be a total reduction of 6 units.
So you go down to 80 properties from the 86 that were in the submittal. And so I guess taking those out then, and particularly focused on St. Ives, where you don't have nearly as much of a buffer as you do kind of on the other property lines, what kind of distance are you talking about, say, between the very last of the properties on either side of that gap between the existing property lines and the backs of those homes?
Relationally, they're still pretty close. I mean, there's a couple things from a grade standpoint, those units are going to sit down lower than the house and the properties on St. Ives, and there will be a 6-foot fence and buffer planting that you have proposed in your packet. From a benefit standpoint, if this were to be developed as by right single family under RS20, there's a 20-foot building setback now required, but no buffer. I mean, traditionally there is not a buffer between single family and single family at all. So
you just have to have that rear setback.
You just have to have the back door of your house has to be at least 20 feet off of the property line of your neighbor.
Okay. And would they satisfy that in this environment?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, when you've worked in the buffer and they're probably on all accounts further than that in terms of the buffer and the fence. Or right on it.
All right. Thanks, Brad.
Ms. Dickerson.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I had some concerns as well, and some of these are going to echo some of my colleagues. I mean, I think by right they could build a pretty nice neighborhood that I think would be very attractive to people like my mom, who has too big of a house to take care of right now. But so I'm concerned that in order to get this, they've got to ask for 10 variances or waivers. And that, to me, signals a concern. I'm also not a huge fan of private streets for some of the same reasons that my colleagues mentioned. I think it's kind of odd that we're having the streets fit the houses instead of the houses fit the street. I mean, the street should be built to our standards, and then they should figure out how the houses fit around it. So it concerns me that we're actually looking at fitting the street to the house or to the development. So that's a concern. I think traffic, not necessarily as concerned maybe about the number of cars going onto Epsbridge, but my thought is, when I drove by it a couple times last week, I mean, don't kid yourselves, everybody's going to want to go left. Okay, everybody's going to go out of this subdivision and down towards the Epsbridge Parkway to those shops. And so to do that, you either got to cut across, I think there's a cut right there in the median, you got to hightail it across there really quick, or else you got to get over, turn right, get over all the way to the left, and then do a U-turn at the Timothy intersection, which I think signals a huge problem. So that's possible, that's a possible concern as well. And then the fact that the developer said that they would be open to not just rental but selling them, that seems kind of odd. It seems like it should be either one way or the other. It seems very odd that you would have a mix of rental and sold units in the same area, especially, I mean, this is a duplex, development. The other thing I guess I'd point out in working through the Envision Athens process, I've talked to a lot of active seniors. I didn't have time to go through all the comments, but some of the ones I did see, they want it walkable. They want to be somewhere they can walk to it, walk to stores. They don't necessarily want to be in their cars. A lot of them are biking and they're walking. I mean, you can't walk from this to shops, not easily, at least not to get, groceries and, boutique shop or whatever, seniors do. Won't be too long. But, that doesn't really, doesn't seem as attractive in that sense. And I realize we don't really, where we would like to have it would be obviously closer downtown, and we're kind of limited on our availability of land down here. But I'm while they're wanting to market that way, I'm not really sure how many of those seniors are going to want to get in their car and have to go somewhere, especially as they get older. I know my mom doesn't feel as comfortable getting in her car and having to drive places now, so she'd rather be somewhere where she could walk, or get to fairly, without having to go across a divided 4-lane road. So those are my concerns.
Slink.
When I took a look at this, I saw it on the Planning Commission agenda and took a look at it, and at first look, I felt like there was a lot to like about this project. I like the compact, kind of modest neighborhood. It feels like a real neighborhood. It has that connectivity, at least through the pedestrian, the pedestrian walkways through it. And I feel like the location being so close to a very large, active commercial center, granted it's over the county line, I feel like that's the kind of slightly more dense development we should want to see in that area. And I don't really have a problem with the private streets. I like the idea of these streets being, lower speed limits. And I kind of like the idea of the county not being responsible for maintaining them, as long as there's some kind of assurance that they will be maintained in perpetuity. I mean, we just had a look at a list of streets we're going begging to the state for $3.5 million to maintain our streets just for 1 year. So those are the kind of things that don't bother me. I'd like to see us maybe ramp up our codes to make sure that there are those assurances for private street neighborhoods. But then I took a drive out there, and I stopped and went into Irish Place and tromped off into the woods a little bit to check out the property. And there is some serious topography out there. And I can just imagine the feat of engineering that would be necessary to bring this property up to grade. And now I understand why they're requesting that mass grading. Brad, are there retaining walls on this plan?
Mm-hmm.
That's about how high?
I mean, they're not super tall retaining walls. The biggest one, if I can get my arrow to point up, come on. It's basically that the boundary between those 8 or 9 units in St. Ives. You'll have your fence buffer and then a wall down to where those units are built, and then it's going to come largely, not really super steep until you get over to the back edge of those outer western side units, and you'll have some pretty significant topography
off the back of
coming
that
off.
circle, there'd probably be a pretty significant.
Off the back of the circle, and really off of the back, off the back side of the of those units. I can't get my pointer to come up, but The ones along the western edge of the developed portion of the property, a lot of those will probably be almost feel like basement units as you're getting grade change again.
So
get
it's
down.
much higher on that.
It's much higher on the top right than it is on the bottom left. It falls that way.
And the St. Ives people would be looking down into it as well.
St. Ives would be above.
Because it seemed
yes.
like, as you go down Iris Place towards where the entrance of the project is, it seems pretty level with the road, but that front end is just a massive hole, like probably close to 100 feet down. And then, further back in the property, it gets steeper and steeper. I feel like there's a great deal of development potential at that front, back end, but a project like this, shrinking it down, maybe cutting off that back circle and eliminating the need for so much grading and filling, especially considering that it's that close to the creek and it's a sensitive environmental area. I really would like to see a project like this in a location like that, but now that I've seen the land and the topography and recognize, the need for these kind of retaining walls and backfill, I don't think this is the right place for it. I think there are probably quite a few places in town where I would love to see something like this.
Ms. Bell?
Yes. When I received the call.
I already called her. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll give in to you again.
No. Back to you.
I'll be short. No, when I received the contact about going to talk about this, I was so excited because I know how much we need aging in place locations. I went ready to go. I knew there was already some questions before I went. When I finally did my own evaluation, I drove, and I didn't go out and climb, but I did drive as far as I could to find. The topography scared me to death because I live in Glenwood, which is extremely hilly. I cannot imagine aging in place, dealing with this to go see your neighbor 10 houses down the street. It would be so hilly. The other part that immediately bothered me was the streets. And the speed sounded great, but to know the reasons why it has to be that. I know we've done the Anna's Walk. The government has taken over that, which I'm very proud that we can do that. But then there's a limit to what we can do to help. And of course, I was conscious of Jerry's situation. But that was an ultimate concern for us. And I don't want us to... People in that age range don't need to have something that's going to come up in a few years that they've got to pay in some money if things don't work out like it was intended. So those are my concerns. I hate that it has to be this question mark, but it's difficult. Very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to applaud what I think is happening where they're leaving the existing buffering, so and then the retaining wall, and then more planting. Is that what I'm hearing? So that the new wall wouldn't be towards the existing neighbors? If I'm reading that right, that is a positive.
I mean, in the backyards of St. Ives,
yeah.
You're going to have backyard, you'll have some planting in a fence, and it's a synthetic product that it looks like a wood fence, but it doesn't decay and rot like a wooden fence.
Gotcha.
And then on the backside of the fence you would get the grade change in the wall and then the units below those.
Because when I saw the example of the fence, it made me think that they needed to have the plantings toward the existing neighbors so that it was buffered. So I thought it was going to be green, then wall, then fence, then green.
I think that's there's a detail in your packet. I think that's the cross-section is, I mean, they've offered to do it both ways. There was concern from some of the neighbors that if you put landscaping on our side of the fence, how are you going to get up here to maintain it? So we don't, and they said whichever way we would do it that way. But generally under our codes and ordinances, it's 5-foot strip of planting, then a fence, then 5 feet on the other side.
Okay, so they can plant?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to repeat what people were saying because they were all good points about the private road, but I think, and this might be something that Bill can address. In my district, a problem that we have is where solid waste, if I'm correct, can go on the private roads to empty the roll carts, but yet code enforcement can't go in there and tell them to put the roll carts up.
I'm not aware. I'll have to
Okay.
check on
Well,
that. I'm not aware
it
of
might
the
just be something we could follow up on, but what I've come into is, and I guess my question would be, how would the solid waste services work through the tight angles on this topography or the private road? But I guess, and then the other thing is, once you get into private roads like this, if we, I hope down the road, are looking at golf carts on our public streets, then this could end up being a golf cart neighborhood because it's private roads, which could be a hazard as well. But anyway, those are just some things, again, with that private road. There's so many things to think about. The services getting in there, as well as code enforcement. I don't know that code enforcement can do, and that's, for a lot of people in my district, those roll carts, they want them all rolled off, but yet if code enforcement can't enforce that on a private street, that can be another issue that we would have to deal with.
Right.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'll just back up and make some comments about HUD having some teeth. If you think HUD has some teeth, then I'll start speaking Russian right now. And I would suggest that all of you read some different materials because as it stands, the way I'm seeing it, you just have, like Brad said, you have to send in an affidavit once every 2 years. You have to just make an intent to market it to it. But I've seen nothing yet to where there's any teeth. The only teeth is if you aren't able to do this, or if you don't keep up the 80%, then you just lose that status. And in some ways, that may, this multifamily project, if you lose that status, there's no skin off their nose about it because they'll rent it to somebody else. There's no teeth in that HOPA Act. Unfortunately, there's not. The other thing to point out is it's been said that there's 45 homes that could be put on here. Well, the 45 homes would probably look a lot like the plan that you see right now because each of these homes each of these townhomes are 16 or 1,800, between 1,600 and 1,800 square feet. That's 3,400 square feet, about the size of a house, probably. But the thing is, whether it's within the RS-25 or the RS-8, the topography of this, sometimes land is difficult to build on. And I understand what staff is doing is trying to, when we have all these waivers, trying to make a project work. But sometimes projects just don't work for a lot of various reasons. Land being a big part of that, and the topography of it. And the question of the retaining walls came up, and it's still uncertain, according to the PD, as to whether or not retaining walls are going to be needed for the stormwater, the 4 stormwater sites that are there. So Iris Place has a retaining wall at their stormwater site. So there's things about land and messing with the contours of a land that ought to be problematic for us. The mass grading request in this, they can go in and mass grading all at once, but I've seen nothing in the PD that says they have to come right behind it and build it right away. All the building has to occur at the same time, but that mass grading could sit there for however long, as long as they meet the codes to keep the dirt from going somewhere. The other component of it is the neighbors who are closest to it. Commissioner Link pointed this out. They're going to be looking down on the rooftops of these homes. Think about where you live and whether or not you want to be looking down at the rooftop of your neighbor's home. And I would suggest don't do that to the St. Ives people. St. Ives people are mainly retirees. And, they would be the target population for this. If they have concerns about it, shouldn't that raise some questions as well? That's all.
Mr. Neesmith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And when we have the hearing on this next month, there will be a lot of St. Ives people here and some other neighborhood people there. And we'll hear about the not in my backyard thing. But notice until just now, all of the objections to this development, none of them have been about not in my backyard.
They haven't been.
It's because there's lots of technical issues here. There's another one. We talked about private street maintenance and the burden that is on private property owners. All that stormwater detention, which is required because of the layout of the land, all that stormwater detention is also the responsibility of those house owners. Difficult to say who's responsible for it. That's an interesting question because it should be part of the common problem, just like the streets are. But in any case, you got lots of stormwater detention ponds that have to be maintained. Thank you.
Mr. Sims.
Yes, ma'am. It's real interesting when you think, I guess Brad and I have been around longer than we ought to be. But I can remember when St. Ives was being talked about and being developed, everybody that lived on Timothy Road was up in arms because they didn't want that development built. And here, these people are who are living in that development are now fussing about a development next to them not wanting it to be built. It's kind of, ironic situation. I think, one of the things that we might need to start really being more aggressive about is, like as Ms. Link said in our plans, is instead of allowing private streets so that we won't have to go through how we can manage them and maintain them and make them build them to the standards of our streets. And then we have to take charge of these streets, and then we'll have control over and can make those restrictions where they are required to have a plan in place to take care of the storm water, and those streets meet our standards versus we're going to play with these narrow streets to slow traffic down and the like. I think that might be something that if I were this developer, I would kind of go back to the drawing board with a little bit of that. The other thing is when I did visit with Mr. Williams, and there's another plan that has the 3 units taken out, gives this a kind of a different look, so to speak, in where those 3 units are. I wish they had, he had given you that too, Brad, so that we could see the comparison. Then he also showed me what it would look like if they just built the 45 houses that by right they can build. That would require a lot of grading as well. And of course, we would lose a lot of the street trees that this does have right now. And I believe, I'm trying to remember that the way they had this thing graded, that the walking trails that they have in there would be of such nature that there would not be really stress or strain on people walking up and down hills. The grades would be fairly, I think 5%, I think is what it was. It kind of reminded me of when Blaine and I were in Korea. They had a trail that the grades were of the nature that people could literally walk around and not actually be walking up a hill, even though the property was, it was real hilly. But they had the grades in there where they could walk without really putting stress on them. And it was also handicap accessible, that they could actually use wheelchairs to ride around and not have any kind of stress or strain. But so, again, this is a unique piece of property. I know there's probably some of the St. Ives people that use it for their little private park, and because that's what they usually do to vacant lots and things that way. This is the way we've had it over the years with several other pieces of property where people would come in and fuss about, we don't want it developed because we have picnics and all these kind of things on somebody else's property. And so this probably is no different than that we went out there, we'd see some trails that lead from one subdivision into the private property. So, there are things to think about, but again, I think the street issue is the main thing that we're talking about. I think that's the biggest thing we need to be. It needs to be, if we're going to deal with this, we need to be dealing with it from, we have control of the streets. And it's in Clark County. Clark County needs to be in charge of what we allow to be built in Clark County.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not going to say too much more, but I just want to bring up a point about, and Jerry brought this up too, and I hope you'll hear this when St. Ives comes to visit with us, and they express this at the Planning Commission. It's not about a not in your backyard thing, or not about not being able to walk through the woods and do whatever, but the St. Ives people have all expressed that, you know, they understand that something may happen here at some point in time. They also understand, as you will hear from some of the residents, that when they bought their house, they looked at the zoning around their house and noticed that this was RS 25. And you know, and now they're asking to be it changed. So when you go buy something, I mean, it's not like you're buying something off Millage Avenue and don't want to be around fraternities and sororities. They're there. So when you have when you have people who do their homework based on this and who have some decision making to make, and they decide to stay here because they're comfortable and secure, that we will look at the zoning and make sure it's right. You know, there could be a reason why this property hasn't been developed all these years. And a lot of it probably is because it's difficult to build on. That could be the same reason Iris Place didn't do their Plan B development. It's a difficult piece of property, and that's the way it is. And is it our job to grant all these waivers to disrupt the environment, to allow a mass grading? Y'all remember when I first came on this commission, that was a big deal when this body passed that mass grading ordinance. And we're just going to throw it out the window right here because somebody comes to us saying senior housing? And the mass grading doesn't, the PD doesn't stipulate they can go mass grade once we approve this. And they can wait years before they build the property. All they have to do is build it all at once. It doesn't say start building right after you mass grade. There's just a lot of questions and concerns, and the public streets is a big one, but there are also other big ones. So, thank you.
Ms. Link?
I have a question about streets. So these streets meet our standards for width, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the reason that they don't meet our standards is because of the curves and the cul-de-sac and all that stuff. What is our standard for width?
20 feet.
Okay, so we have plenty of streets in some of our older neighborhoods that don't meet that standard, yet they have to have 25-mile-an-hour speed limits, correct?
I'm not aware of any that are carrying anything less than 25. And it's more generally, you know, we probably have some substandard streets out there in terms of horizontal and vertical curves based on their age that are posted at 25 because that's as low as we can go.
Because we don't allow. I just know lots of people would love to see a lower speed limit through their neighborhood, and they might be living on streets that are more like this than your typical neighborhood. I mean, like I said, you know, the street thing doesn't bother me if there's an assurance that they will be maintained. But yeah, the grading definitely bothers me, and especially as you get to the back end of the project, I feel like, you know, this project could work if it was more compact, if they knocked that back end off it, and, you know, maybe even looked at townhomes or something on the front end facing Irish Drive. But it's the mass grading impact that's really getting me on this.
Mr. Harrod, you want to?
I just had a quick question. There's an old oxidation pond out there somewhere. Is that on this piece of property? Brad, do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay.
No, that's in Oconee County.
It is? It's on the other, okay. I mean, I guess for me, you know, pretty much everything that my colleagues have said, or at least most of them, I mean, to me, when you're asking for 10 waivers, there has to be a pretty overwhelming public benefit that comes from that, and I just don't see what that public benefit is. So.
Anybody else? Well, I can't sit here and not say anything because I feel like I'm sitting here going through deja vu.
All over again.
Because this type thing is what actually compelled me to run for office the first time. And I have quite a number of concerns about it based on experiences that I've had as a private individual and things that I've watched since I've been here. The private roads bother me a lot because I remember saying something about that they would be required to maintain the percentages of seniors and the roads. It's like, who is the they? Because this is probably going to end up being possibly part rental, part ownership. You know, where's the responsibility? and we've already had problems like we've had that Jerry mentioned. I've heard several others of that type. The mass grading and the completely reconfiguring of the topography bother me tremendously. I recall back, and I think it was probably the next to the last rezoning fight we had in my neighborhood before I ran for office, that all the property across the street from me where it's Pine Forest Drive, and it has extreme topography, that we were being told when somebody wanted to come in there and put what they called at the time cluster houses, which are the same thing as this, and there was concern that they would become rental, but we were told that the property couldn't be used for single family. And when it didn't happen, actually one of the people in the neighborhood bought the property and developed it as single family, and they're beautiful single family homes now that worked within the topography that's already there. And I think the grading and taking down all those trees bothers me the most. But just recently on Oglethorpe Avenue, we had a rezoning for offices down there where the property was completely denuded, and for that to go in, for some reason it didn't work, and it's sitting there denuded now, and don't know when anything else will happen to it. Something that also bothers me a lot is the street maintenance, because I believe that, of course, this will be way out long after many of us are gone, but it'll fall back on the responsibility of the county. And there are just so many things that are wrong with this that I'm having a hard time even addressing all of them. But the denuding of the property, the mass grading, if you've got a grade to the point that you've got to build retaining walls between communities, is problematic. But something else that I've been thinking about that is from my own experience, my own neighborhood, is Hampton Park. And I've thought a lot, why did we ever allow that to happen? Because we've got so many entrances into Oglethorpe Avenue that are so close to each other that are problematic, that could have been dealt with very easily if they just made Forest Heights Drive, which divides those communities, into the main entrance, and had going into Hampton Park off of it, so that you didn't have so many entrances off of Oglethorpe Avenue. I see the same thing here, but it's even worse because it's on a much busier street. So I have massive problems with it, and I just wanted to express those for y'all to hear it, because I've lived through it, and I'm also a demographic that is supposedly being marketed to. I wouldn't want to live there, like the way it's laid out. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, I guess that's it for tonight.
Yes, that's it.
I'm sorry, we got one more small one.
Yes, that's it.
Go ahead, Brad.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
I think I've talked enough.
We got one more
Oh, I
We've
thought
got one
we
more item. I just
yeah.
didn't know if there were more comments here.
No, that's it. That's the last item.
Okay. One other item is a text amendment in our procedure section 9.4. Probably the easiest way I can explain this one to you to make it make sense. If you look on the proposed amendment under E2C, where it says if the rezoning, and we've added or special use permit application is initiated by a party other than Athens Clarke County, and then it goes on to talk about how they, that's if a citizen wants to request a rezone. We've had this language in there, and we've never referred to special use permit, which technically is different than a rezoning of property. So we really had some vague language in the code from a standpoint of saying that a special use permit also has to follow those same procedures. So that's what we're doing here, is we're plugging in special use permit, and then while we were at it, there was specific language in our ordinance as to what the zoning signs are to say, and we're just requesting consideration to not make it so specific, give us criteria. But I mean, even something simple like if for some reason we change our phone number at the office, we would have to amend our zoning ordinance because it specifies the phone number. We don't need that in here. So those are the changes, really clean up, and it was a unanimous recommendation to approve.
Anybody have any questions on this one or comments? Okay, we can go home.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, go to church.